Every day, millions of new devices are brought online. From the iPhone in your pocket to the self-driving car making its way down your street, online connected devices make our lives easier and bring our society to a new age of innovation. By the year 2025, reports suggest that 39 billion devices will be connected, and each new device comes with new threats. Today's world makes everyone more susceptible to cyber attacks. Threats like these continue to evolve, and data breaches seem to rise each year. In the first 9 months of 2019 alone, a shocking 7.9 billion records have been exposed through data breaches by malicious actors. Cybercrime is a global problem. It poses a threat to individual security, an even bigger threat to large international companies, banks, and governments. Today's organized cybercrimes far overshadow lone hackers of the past. Today's cybercrime groups now operate as organized crime units, functioning like startups, employing highly trained developers who are constantly innovating online attacks. The hackers are becoming smarter and more creative with their malware, and how they bypass virus scans, firewalls, and more still baffles many people. With so much data to exploit in our modern world, there has to be some sort of protocol that protects us against all these cyber attacks and makes sure that we don't fall into the wrong hands. This is why we need cybersecurity. All right, good afternoon and welcome to the College of IST's Alumni Society's Cybersecurity Past, Present, and Future. I'm Corey Wallace. I'm a 2009 IST grad and a member of the IST Alumni Society Board, and I'll be your host and moderator today. We're very happy to have you join us for this unique taste on cybersecurity, the current threats, where we've been as an industry and where we're going, and how it's been for new professionals entering this field during a pandemic, which we all are in. We have a panel of incredible speakers today who will be presenting their experience and the knowledge of the world of cybersecurity. And once all the presentations are finished, they'll be ready to answer any questions that you have. So please have them ready for the Q&A box when that begins. We very much hope you enjoy this presentation. For our first speaker, we're going to welcome Luke Simonetti, a 2007 Penn State IST grad and current president of the College of IST's Alumni Society Board. Luke is a global security and consulting practice lead for Gartner, alongside an executive advisor for the information security professional and information security professional with more than 15 years experience in information security, security architecture, risk management, MSSP sourcing, and security operations centers. His career includes working at companies like PwC and Booz Allen Hamilton, where he gained experience across the commercial side of the public sector industries and a varying level of management and technical hands-on support for clients. A Central PA native and current resident, Luke enjoys the outdoor activities with his wife and 4 young children. Let's welcome Luke Simonetti. Take it away.
All righty. Thank you very much, Corey. Very much appreciate that introduction. So, as you said, and as you can see, the nice lion shrine background here behind my head, I'm a PA native and a current resident here right outside of State College. But, with all of the things going on today, certainly need to, understand where were we and think about where we're going from a cybersecurity perspective. And, as we start to navigate some of the changes that COVID-19 has brought, how's it changed how we work, what security requirements are for environments, and where are we going in the future? So, given my perspective and my career here at Gartner, we get to work over really all the commercial and federal sector, both here in the U.S. and abroad as well, and get to experience quite a bit of those types of challenges that they have. So, as we start to think about what did we used to see in the environment, or what did we think of when organizations were looking to invest in security? And it's an ever-changing environment, but traditionally, we saw these 10 different areas being budgeted, with cloud adoption and enablement really driving them all, but certainly looking across quite a number of different topics. First and foremost, with really controlling some of the privileged access management. What are you doing? What are your entitled users doing in the environment, and making sure that you think through what are the risks to your environment and what protections do you have in place. So the nature of security has certainly been evolving, and quite frankly getting more challenging than than when I started in my career here, within security, and started after earning my degree here at Penn State. But that lifelong learning mentality that we adopted certainly went and helped quite a bit as we broke into that, and actually getting into some of the areas like security monitoring and threat intelligence really started to drive some of the activities and analysis that my team and myself do in the industries, and really the questions that are being driven from some of the companies that we work with as well. And Jack, our next speaker, will go into some more specifics around threat actors. But as we look through what has the present, what has COVID-19 really presented from a challenges standpoint and threat actor opportunities? So I think, as most of us are now slowly starting to change, working from home, that shift from when we actually had to start working from home was a massive undertaking for quite a number of organizations, because now that their typical edge, if you would, from a security standpoint, exploded. So how do you make sure that you can control your environment and securely enable access to to your environment through sometimes things like insecure devices? And how do you do this when the threat actors are becoming more and more sophisticated, particularly some of the nation states that go after certain companies and go after intellectual property, as well as some of the hacktivists that are out there as well. So a few of the risks that we've seen and I've observed from some of the interactions I've had with clients have largely stemmed from some of the denial of service risks to a delay in incident response, and really gaining that visibility and ability to track down incidents in a timely manner. Certainly the spike in, call it scams or fraud as a result of different work from home capabilities being enabled, certainly challenged the environments, and still consistently challenges our clients. But it is and has driven quite a strong change in the way organizations think about their environment. And just a fun little statistic for you as we think about how this impacted some of these changes, thinking about the identity component of the environment and the challenge it presents to organizations. There's a report out that from the Verizon data breach report, showing that 81% of the breaches that have been reported involved some form of compromised credentials, whether it be passwords or even other components, to really get through some of those, we'll call it hard, crunchy outsides that many organizations relied on to protect their environment. And, because of the remote environment we live in today, it enabled some of those threat actors to get inside undetected and wreak havoc, if you would. So where do we see some of the future going as a part of this? Certainly seeing some of the drive around, business continuity and the shift towards more cloud components and secure remote working strategies has really driven quite a demand on the security departments in the organization. So you start to see a change in the approach and a change in what we're looking at and how we structure the services we provide as a security organization. So when we're working with customers, or when I'm working with executives, starting to communicate and think about some of these concepts and the evolution of security as you move forward, has certainly changed and made it more, trying to make it more difficult in the chicken and egg game we play with attackers. So there's quite a lot of content, and to be honest, I could spend the entire day talking about cybersecurity. But as we think about, whereas cybersecurity professionals or those that are looking to get into cybersecurity, we start to think about where is the expertise really coming from and going. And there's been a shift a little bit in terms of kind of where skills are becoming more valuable to organizations, as well as some of those roles that are being declining somewhat because of automation or orchestration tools as a component. So you'll see some of the massive swings and things to, I'll tell you what, think about as you kind of approach and evolve your career in security. Should give you a pretty good list of things to think about and look at. But it is and has been for quite a while a big data problem in security when you're trying to catch attackers and look for and know what you're trying to attack. It all comes back to understanding what you're looking for, what could go wrong, and what's normal in your environment, and starting to catch those things. So the last point that I wanted to leave you with, was thinking about, as we continue to evolve from a security mindset. I came across this great quote, and it is one that kind of sticks with me as we work through security. And a different way to think about it is you have to get the fundamentals right, and those fundamentals have been fundamentals for quite a while, so that you don't challenge yourself going forward and don't repeat some of the challenges that we've had in the past. So it is really important to reflect on where you've been as a security organization and as a security professional, and think forward into where you need to go and how to leverage that going forward. So I wanted to thank you all for joining today. I certainly appreciate it and hope that myself and the rest of the speakers provide some great value for you. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Corey.
All right, thank you very much, Luke. Just a quick reminder, Luke and the rest of our panelists are going to be taking your questions during the Q&A portion of our presentation after our final speaker. So please save your questions until the end. Now for our second speaker, Jack Tamarcio. Jack is a 1977 Penn State grad with a major in history. He went on to get his JD from the Vermont Law School, a master's in government administration from the Feld Center of Government from the University of Pennsylvania, and another master's from the United States Army of War College. He's currently a principal with Agoji Group and an international strategic firm. A little bit of back to Jack's history. In 2005, he was appointed by George Bush to be the first principal deputy assistant for the Homeland Security for Intelligence and Analysis. In 2007, he was elevated to principal deputy under the Secretary of Intelligence Analysis Operations. He's also co-chaired as the firm's cybersecurity practice group. Jack is a founding partner of Hill Solutions, LLC and Homeland Solutions, LLC. And in 2008, he was a member of Mitt Romney's national security team, where he developed and co-authored the candidate's position on counterterrorism and homeland security. Jack's an active entrepreneur, a frequent television commentator, a writer, and a speaker on national security issues. He also sits on several boards related to the defense, intelligence, and cyber crime community. He currently serves as a senior fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute and a senior advisor for the Chertoff Group. Without any further ado, Jack, take it away.
Corey, thank you very much for that introduction. And Luke, thank you for leading off. I'm your second Italian-American speaker here today. So I'm happy to be here. And what I really want to discuss with you today is what I see as some of the greatest immediate threats to our national security in 2020. And I really look at them right now as three. First, certainly, is the current pandemic that we're all living through, the coronavirus pandemic. And certainly we've now gone over 150,000 dead Americans in this country. And this is really a public health crisis that we haven't seen in literally 100 years, since 1918, 1919. And then as a result of that pandemic, we have our second major national security threat, which is the adverse economic impact that the pandemic has had on our economy. We have millions of people out of work. We have careers stalled and derailed. We have schools not sure if they're going to open or not going to open. We have a careening stock market, and we have the closure of thousands of small businesses around the country. putting people out of work. And then, of course, number three is really the increased civil, societal, and racial unrest that we see in our country today, much of which stemming from the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis, and we're still seeing the reverberations of that in places like Portland, Oregon. And as bad as these three threats are, and really it's kind of like a three-headed hydra that we have here, as bad as these threats seem, there's one other threat, one kind of pervasive threat or overarching threat that encompasses all of these three threats, and indeed almost exists in a symbiotic relationship with these three threats. And that threat is the cyber threat that now looms over our nation. This threat is also called the fifth domain. And the reason it's called that, there's domains of warfare, and you're familiar with these: land warfare, air warfare, sea warfare, warfare now in space, and finally the fifth domain, cyber warfare. And when we look at cyber warfare and cyber security challenges, we look at the specter of our adversaries around the world, stealing our corporate and intellectual and academic IP, intellectual property. We see them stealing our military secrets. We see them stealing our personal protective information, our privacy information, our health records. We see them stealing our money, trying to tap into our accounts and exfiltrate millions of dollars from the American populace. We see them trying to shut down our critical infrastructure and possibly actually harming our ability to heat our cities and to serve our populace and to keep our hospitals running. And so even as these are nightmare scenarios, we have yet another scenario that is now particularly instant as a threat, and that is the present threat to destroy our very principles of democratic government, especially when you talk about the upcoming 2020 presidential elections. We are now less than 100 days out. I think we're at like 95 days out to the 2020 elections. And I think many of us would agree that these elections could be the most important elections, certainly of our lifetime. And I would concur with that. And looming over this election of 2020 is the fact that there are numerous nation-state actors, hacktivists, individuals, malefactors that are seeking to undermine and poison this election for their own purposes. A little history is in order, I think, when it comes to elections. Influencing voters, bribing voters, voting dead people, corrupting voting officials, stealing votes, refusing to allow voters to vote. These are as old as democracy itself. In fact, if you were to do some historical research, you could go as far back as ancient Rome and ancient Greece. These were early democracies, and you could see, even at that time, officials trying to rig and steal elections. So nations have long tried to influence other nations' elections. In fact, the United States has done that ourselves with adversaries. But now, in the age of disinformation and the age of computers and misinformation, we see the ability to influence an election at a greater chance of that happening than ever before. Certainly, with the rise of the internet, with the rise of our wired society, the influence against an election, or the determination to provide disinformation or misinformation, is merely a keystroke away. It's very quick and it's very pervasive. We saw in 2019 the release of the Mueller report, which concluded that regarding the 2016 presidential election, Russia intervened in a quote unquote, or quote, sweeping and systematic fashion with that presidential election. The report continued that the Russians continue today to interfere in US elections, and that many more countries around the world have developed their own disinformation campaigns targeting US elections based on the Russian model of 2016. Now, when we talk about those malefactors, who are the likely candidates of doing that? Well, right now there are three. Certainly the Russians, the Chinese, and the Iranians. That doesn't mean there aren't other countries, but those are really the big three and the most active in this area. Some recent unclassified intelligence. Last year, there were hacks against the US presidential primary elections. And as you remember, there were many, many Democratic hopefuls in the presidential primary. Every one of those presidential primary candidates had their campaigns hacked by different individuals. Indeed, we saw that the same pattern of engagement that the Russians used in 2016 to get into the Democratic National Committee servers were being used against the different Democratic candidates in 2019. In 2019, in October to be exact, an Iranian hacker group, codenamed Phosphorus, attacked the email accounts of US journalists, US government officials, and the campaign of a US presidential candidate. Now, it was never released who that was, but the British press, the British newspaper, The Guardian, in fact, identified that campaign as the campaign of none other than President Donald J. Trump. So it's not just the Democrats that were targets, but also the Republicans. On October 21st, 2019, Facebook announced that a highly sophisticated set of campaigns of interference were launched by the Iranians and the Russians to deal with and to infiltrate the 2020 elections. They also found that fake actors based in Russia posing as American citizens were working to undermine the campaign of former Vice President Joe Biden for president. In 2019, weak passwords and weak encryption allowed foreign hackers to get into numerous state voting machines throughout the country. In February of this year, the intelligence community's top election security official, Shelby Pearson, testified before the Senate Intelligence Committee that Russia was 100% interfering in the 2020 election to re-elect President Trump. Apparently, President Trump didn't like that testimony of Mr. Pearson, and as a result, he fired his superior, the acting director of National Intelligence, Vice Admiral Joe Maguire. So it's pretty clear across numerous spectrums that adversaries are trying to influence and trying to work to undermine our 2020 national elections. So the question would be, what are we going to do about it? Are we going to sit back and take it? Or is there anything that we're doing to try and counter this threat? Well, fortunately, we are doing some things. There's a new command, fairly new, in the military called U.S. Cyber Command, and it's a combatant command headed by a four-star general, General Paul Nakasone of the Army. Cyber Command has been given relaxed rules of engagement to deal with the threat. Now, what that means is that they don't have to go up to the National Command Authority. When I say the National Command Authority, I'm the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the president, to conduct offensive cyber actions against known adversaries. They are allowed to do this on their own, with their own determination, if they feel that offensive operations are warranted. So they are right now conducting persistent engagement tactics both against the Russians and other adversaries. They also have launched what they call defend forward approach to operational tactics in the cyber realm. To that end, they're involved in network exploitation of adversaries, cyber-enabled influence operations, degrading cyber attacks, and disrupting foreign cyber operations on a daily level. In 2018, during the midterm elections, they launched a number of offensive actions using emails, pop-ups, direct messages against Russian social media trolls spreading disinformation that they had identified as being active operators in this realm. They also messaged hackers directly who were working for the Russian Military Intelligence Unit, the GRU, who is very involved in this. They found that the trolls continued to persist, and then they ramped up the pressure even further by conducting offensive cyber actions against the Russian Internet Research Agency, which is somewhat like the NSA, but is heavily involved in Russian disinformation tactics in the cyber realm. And in fact, they actually took the servers offline by blocking their internet access. At the same time, U.S. Cyber Command worked closely with our allies in NATO, and by sending contact teams into NATO countries to learn what the Russian tactics, techniques, and procedures were against those countries themselves. And they exposed Russian hacking tools to networks of our European allies, and then using a malware inoculation initiative, uploaded Russian military-grade malware using something called VirusTool to a private website for crowdsourcing threat analysis. What they actually did there was they invited in civilian, uncleared cybersecurity experts to examine the Russian malware and to determine what it looked like and to discuss ways of countering it. These are very aggressive and very unique and frankly out-of-the-box tactics that Cyber Command has been using. We have found that as a result of this, the Russians have tamped down their activity somewhat. But like any chess game in which you make a move and your opponent makes a counter move, and then you make a move and he makes a counter move, this continuing game of cat and mouse never stops. I want to finish by saying that the fifth domain game is upon us. It is upon us every day, and it is looming as we get towards our election day on November 3rd, 2020. All we can do and all we must do as a nation, as an institution, as a military, and as a society is to continue to keep our deflector shields up and work on offensive opportunities to counter this threat. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Jack. That was great. Finally, we have our last speaker, Nicholas Capone. Nick is a 2019 IST grad who majored in security and risk analysis and information and cybersecurity. Upon graduating, Nicholas moved to Washington, D.C. to begin his career as a cyber risk consultant in Deloitte's Government Public Services and Advisory practice. Please welcome Nick Capone. Over to you, Nick.
Thank you, Corey, for the introduction. Hello all. Firstly, thank you for joining us today on our before, during, and after COVID-19 cybersecurity discussion. As Corey mentioned, my name is Nicholas Capone, and I'm a 2019 graduate of the College of Information Sciences and Technology. While at Penn State, I majored in security risk analysis, information and cybersecurity, with a minor in information sciences, technology, and supply chain management. I graduated from the College of IST in May of 2019, and shortly thereafter began my career in Washington, D.C. as a cyber risk consultant within Deloitte's Government Public Services Risk and Financial Advisory practice. And unlike our past presenters, I bring with me a unique perspective as someone who's had years of experience in the cybersecurity industry. This upcoming August will be one whole year post-graduation. However, in all reality, I bring with me a story of someone who recently graduated and entered the workforce during a global pandemic. You spend much time, especially in your final year of college, preparing and anticipating for your transition into the workforce. I remember spending those last months of college daydreaming of what it would be like to be a government consultant. You fill your head with these infinite possibilities of where you'll be working, who you'll be working with, are you going to like your job, and maybe most importantly, is your job going to like you? And it's hard not to look back at these thoughts and think of it as a fruitless venture. If 23-year-old me could go back and tell 22-year-old me what the first year of working would be like, I'd say, one, do we really have to graduate? And two, is Armageddon right around the corner? But just like that first year of college, the first year of graduation changes who you are. What you once considered to be the most important life-defining moments soon get overshadowed with these newfound responsibilities and commitments to the real world. And this is all not to sound too drab, because this past year has been filled with absolutely life-defining learning opportunities. The challenges brought upon by not only entering the workforce, but entering the workforce during a global pandemic, while definitely not anticipated nor necessarily welcome, has come to shape who I am as a growing business professional. And my journey as a growing business professional did not start off in a global pandemic environment. Actually, quite the opposite. It was filled with that unbridled excitement for what a normal life could potentially be. My pre-COVID-19 experience as a working man occurred in what I would consider a 5-month consulting Shangri-La. I started with Deloitte back in September of 2019, and the first 3 months were spent in a lot of trainings. And I mean a lot of trainings and acclimating to what I consider to be the consulting culture. And if I'm being honest, I was in complete awe of my onboarding experience. This drastic shift from broke college student to domestically well-traveled consultant was fun to say the least. The challenges you were exposed to and the networking opportunities with these incredibly talented individuals was simply just awesome. Then eventually the trainings came to an end and you begin to settle into your project and role. From late October of 2019 to around March of 2020, I was learning the ins and outs of my project. While I can't get into too much detail, I worked to help government agencies establish programs to manage their IT assets. So the bulk of my work as an entry-level consultant was learning how to communicate with both your internal team and your external clients. The biggest shock or unexpected aspect of my job was how the client-facing portion affects your work on a day-to-day basis. The level of scrutiny and attention to detail given to each client deliverable is just unparalleled to what you previously experienced in college. At first, it can be quite overwhelming, but you soon find the challenge of delivering your absolute best work to not only be exciting, but honestly pretty fulfilling. And I work on a direct team of about 15 individuals who really do push each other every day to deliver the best quality work. Without my teammates pushing me on a day in and day out basis, I do not believe myself nor my team would be able to deliver work at the quality that is expected. And working on a team was and still is my favorite part of the job. I find feeding off the energy and being in a room with incredibly talented individuals extremely valuable for professional growth. And that's why on March 13th of 2020, I got some news that at first sounded like a pretty nice vacation. We received an email from our client saying that due to COVID-19, we'll be working offsite indefinitely, also known as working from home. And as we were leaving the office, my teammates and I were taking bets on when we thought we would return. Some said 2 weeks, others, including myself, said around a month, and the crazy ones said 2 months plus. 5 months later, and clearly the crazy ones are a little less crazy, and Zoom has not left the building, which for me has been the biggest challenge during the pandemic. Pandemicless, graduating college and entering the workforce is already a drastic shift in your day-to-day activities. You add a little global pandemic into the mix, and it's like you're living in two different realities separated by a few months in a college degree. And while I'm no genie and my guess is as good as the rest, I anticipate most recent graduates will be entering the workforce from home. And in my humble opinion, it will require working on a set of skills you may not have practiced much or knew you needed to practice in college. And one is you will need to become a master of self-time management. Working from home, the only person holding you accountable is yourself. And unlike college, a missed class that leads to a lower grade will upset you and potentially your parents. However, a missed class in the professional world could equate to an unhappy client and an unhappy boss. And while unhappy client and unhappy boss do not rhyme with unhappy life, I can guarantee you the two are strongly correlated. And another skill set that I think would be beneficial to work on before entering a predominantly remote workforce is self-motivation. One difference between college and the real world is concrete goal setting. In college, it's fairly easy to set goals. I want to get a 4.0 my fourth semester sophomore year. Whereas compared to the real world, you need to goal set more strategically. While you definitely still have a mix of short-term and long-term goals, as an adult, those goals are less defined and increasingly up to your own prerogative, which has both its benefits and drawbacks, in my opinion. You are now given the opportunity to achieve any dream you ever desired. However, the difficulty of goal setting is often underestimated, and finding a goal that intrinsically motivates you is no easy feat. Not to mention that goals take a little bit longer to achieve post-graduation. So finding and keeping yourself motivated both on long-term and short-term goals is, in my opinion, essential for professional growth. And finally, I believe it is absolutely imperative, especially in a pandemic work from home environment, that you work to actively seek learning opportunities from your peers. When I first joined Deloitte and started working within my project-specific role, I'll be honest, I was a little overwhelmed. But being on a team and in a physical room with 15 other experts in your field, you soon realize that you're surrounded by learning and professional growth opportunities everywhere you look. However, what I have found most difficult since moving into a remote environment is still keeping those learning opportunities alive and present in your day-to-day activities in this virtual remote environment. And one thing that I've done to maintain these learning opportunities is by scheduling check-ins, or think of it almost as like a virtual coffee with my project management. And during these check-ins, I come prepared with questions and prompts to elicit specific feedback about my work. Personally, I think giving your peers and especially your management an open and conducive environment to provide feedback is just essential for professional growth. Um, Often, while working from home, it's easy to get wrapped into your own little bubble and you forget about all the other moving parts of the project that are occurring now virtually around you. So I think it's important to schedule these meetings, and while it may seem a little forced or unnatural at first, so is starting your career during a global pandemic. But, and if we're being honest, the pandemic did bring about some noticeable improvements to my team and project. Before the pandemic, I worked on a hybrid team where about 6 out of the 15 people worked from home or off-site, including a few managers and senior management. However, now with the implementation of Zoom and video conferencing, the team as a whole feels a little bit more connected between that on-site and off-site difference. And another positive of this virtual remote work from home environment is actually increased face time in front of the client. Before the pandemic, meetings were limited to, believe it or not, the physical size of the room you could fit in. Now with Zoom and video conferencing, you could fit a virtually unlimited amount of people in the room. So I now have these learning opportunities to see how partners and senior management interact with clients that I did not have before. And so moving forward, while the pandemic is definitely not ideal, it's a challenge and a story. And with any good challenge or story comes growth. And I believe there are tons of opportunities for growth regardless of job, industry, role, etc. And at the end of the day, this pandemic is new to everyone and it's shaping a new way of work. I believe a recent grad that is apt to solve problems and take on new and unfamiliar challenges will fare well in this hyper-evolving remote landscape. And at the end of the day, if you can survive a global pandemic, I think by definition, you are resilient and you are strong. And when 5 years pass and it's time to tell your story, it will be one how you face great uncertainty, but used well-developed skills to thrive. And again, if you can survive the highs and lows of Penn State football, I think this pandemic work from home thing will be a piece of cake. Thank you guys all for your time.
Thanks very much, Nick. You're a wise old man in a young man's body. With that, we're ready for your questions for the panelists. Please post them now in the Q&A box of the Zoom webinar or the Facebook comments of the live stream. I'll be turning the Q&A over to Nikita, our behind-the-scenes board member who has helped make this all possible. So Nikita, kudos to you.
Thank you, Corey. Our first question is over to you, Jack. Your career is quite impressive. How do you go from a history grad to Homeland Security at the White House? Was that always an interest to you?
That's a long story, but yeah, I did go from a history grad from Penn State in 1977, went on to law school. The one thing that happened when I did graduate from Penn State, I was commissioned. I was an Army ROTC nerd. So I was commissioned as an officer at graduation from Penn State and became an Army lawyer for 4 years on active duty, and then had the opportunity to serve with some what we call special missions units down at Fort Bragg. These were highly operational, somewhat classified units involved in worldwide counterterrorism activities or worldwide very sensitive military activities. And that was able to take me into areas that I'd never really expected I'd go into. And then stayed in the reserves after I got out of the Army and still continued to do some work in the classified realm. And then when I was I guess it was a lieutenant colonel, I had the opportunity to be assigned to the Pentagon in a special operations low intensity conflict and got involved in some pretty interesting things down there. Was asked to chair a group of fellows in a study, folks in a study about the use of misuse of intelligence to justify the invasion of Iraq in the Second Iraq War. And then as a result of that, somebody liked what I read, and I was asked to come into the administration. And so, it's nothing really. I guess it's just things happen in your career. Try to place yourself and go after things you find interesting. And I just thought it was interesting to be involved in national security. So I had the opportunity then to become an undersecretary in the Bush administration, and number 2 for all threat intelligence for the homeland.
That is indeed very impressive. Thank you for that, Jack. Okay, our next question is going over to Luke. how do you anticipate quantum computing impacting cybersecurity? What timeline do you anticipate these changes happening?
Yeah, that's always the fun question, and a really really good one. One that's definitely coming up more and more. I mean, quantum computing is certainly right around the corner in terms of the availability of it. It's one that is rapidly evolving, but we're not quite there yet. But the biggest challenge that it's going to present is really around encryption. I mean, you think now we'll just take password hashing, for example. Certainly we've made leaps and bounds in that case, but how the time that it takes to crack encryption when you factor in quantum will drastically decrease. It'll go from, say, thousands of years to a week for the time required to essentially decrypt information as a part of it. Now, in terms of the overall timeline where we're going to see it be super pervasive, and start to see some of the quantum attacks, unless there's we'll say a dynamic leap forward in the near future, you're starting to think in we'll just say the realm of 20 to 50 years to where it's very, very pervasive and just across the board. So it is one where there's a lot of varying elements there, but the biggest item is going to be, at least from a commercial and government perspective, is creating those call them quantum safe encryption methodologies and starting to think through how do we keep up with that kind of challenge. And in particular, as you start to think about, well, what data would we want to protect, from those types of attacks? I mean, certainly financial information, health information, any of the, call them classified government documents or systems would start to factor in there. But it is a growing threat, I would say, but we're just now starting to see some of the standards being released around it here in 2020 and into 2021 as well. So we're not here yet, but we're getting there very, very quickly.
A very insightful answer. Thanks for that, Luke. Over to you, Nick. We have a question from an incoming freshman. What's the best advice you can give, such as skills that that person would need in knowledge and coding, maybe some possible classes you can recommend?
Yep. So if you're an incoming freshman into the College of IST, I think the biggest thing you should work on and you should really take advantage of is just all the opportunities that the College of IST presents to you. One of the biggest things that I got involved with that I really enjoyed during my time at the College of IST was actually becoming a learning assistant. So a learning assistant is someone who assists the professor and teacher with their learning and their schedule and their academic schedule, and the experiences and the learning opportunities from being in LA and being in the classroom and being involved with the College of IST was just absolutely incredible. And I think that really transitioned well over into becoming a full-time employee. And at the end of the day, the College of IST has tremendous opportunities everywhere you look. So really just getting involved within the College of IST will set you down the path to learn all the skills necessary for when you enter the workforce.
That's a great answer. Thank you for that, Nick. Now I'll open this up to the rest of the panelists. So while everyone is almost working from home, how do you use VPN to protect the home network? Meaning, would you recommend to install a VPN to every house's main router?
Oh, that's a good question. I guess I'll take a first stab at it. I'll give you my personal opinion or personal experience. I have a VPN. I VPN all of my traffic out of my environment and do that in two ways. So one, the main trunk that comes in, or my main router, certainly has a VPN connection on it, but also from a work standpoint, obviously I VPN and do all my work into there as well, and I have a specific route set up for that VPN connection, so I'm not double VPNing in that case, because that would be overkill. So it's one where I would say it depends on what you're doing. That's my favorite consulting answer. It depends, but certainly it can be worth it. But there is a little bit of, I'll call it, management overhead that comes with setting up and managing a VPN. But beyond that, it's really your choice, and as long as you're potentially being careful and using strong passwords as much as possible in different ones. You could get by without doing it if you don't want to, the hassle of that management overhead. But I'll let the other panelists speak to it as well.
Hey, Jack, any comment on that?
I think hit it all.
All right, perfect. So just a reminder, if you have any questions, please do type them in the Q&A box of the Zoom or in the Facebook comments of the live stream. Luke, follow-up for you. You already worked from home, so that may not be new, but what was challenging for you when the pandemic began, and what tips can you give us to managing home office?
Yeah, make sure your office has a door if you can. That's very helpful. I have, as you heard in the intro, I have 4 young children at home, so that was the biggest adjustment, keeping them out of the office to start with. But now it's pretty commonplace for my clients and my colleagues to have kids or spouses or dogs to interrupt in meetings, so that's become a little bit less of a problem. But working from home, I think the biggest challenge that I overcame quite a number of years ago when I started working more from home was time management. It's really, really easy to get distracted during the day, or think, oh, I can just pop out and do that or this, or that's getting better at time management is certainly one angle. Staying connected, I think, is another one. I mean, most of my team is fairly distributed across the US and across the globe, so we've been no stranger to using Zoom, WebEx, Teams, kind of pick your video conferencing technology of the day for that. So, just staying connected and even just having regular touch points where you would typically just, grab a coffee or something at work, when you're in the office would certainly is certainly helpful throughout the day. And the last point, that I would make is, making sure you set aside time, for for yourself during this, and don't become a workaholic in that case, because it's one where it's much, much easier to do that when you work from home. But yeah, I mean, the only real effect I would say that, from a home office standpoint that COVID has had is that I'm in my home office a lot more. I used to travel 60 to 70% of the year. And yeah, I've made one trip since March at this point. So it's been a change in that respect.
Awesome. Thanks, Luke. Jack, this one's over to you. So, as somebody who hadn't come from an undergrad degree with cybersecurity, how can you succeed in a cybersecurity major or the cybersecurity industry if you do not have that education background?
Sure. Well, again, when I went to Penn State, we didn't even have cybersecurity majors. I didn't think we had computers. So it was a challenge. My background and the kind of work I do a lot of policy work. And whether it's cyber policy, whether it's intelligence policy, legal issues, I think that, my training as an attorney, I think has been very helpful, because what you learn in law school about statutory regulatory authority, and then the work I did in the military and then in the Department of Homeland Security, all that stuff is incredibly valuable. You don't need to, for what I do, you don't need to be a technologist. I don't need to learn coding to work on the kind of things I'm working on, because I'm dealing with threat intelligence, and it's just a different medium. And in the old days, you deal with intelligence, human intelligence, people breaking into buildings or something and trying to take photographs of papers with a little mini camera. Now you just steal that stuff from the from their, you just break into their computer. You don't need a mini camera. You just exfiltrate the documents. So there's a different way to do it. But the policy, the issues of security are in many cases the same. So I'm dealing on more macro issues than granular issues of cybersecurity. I'm dealing on cyber policy. I'm dealing on legal issues surrounding privacy and data protection. And so my background fits in well for that. And it's not, for me, it wasn't necessary to get a degree in cybersecurity, because, again, when I went there, they didn't have those degrees.
Great, thanks for that, Jack. And we have time for about one more question here. And I'll open this up to all the panelists. And this is a follow-up question. So how would you protect your business asset while working from home, knowing that your whole family is using the same network?
I don't have a family yet, so a little unqualified to answer the question.
How about you, Luke or Jack?
Yeah, I was gonna say. I guess I'll jump on that one first. Yeah, I'll be honest. There's two things that happen. All my kids are young, 10 and under. So yeah, they see technology and want to play with it. So I've had some interesting messages sent to some of my colleagues via Teams if I've forgotten to lock it, which thankfully it's only been to my team and not any of my clients. But I think most of my clients would get a chuckle out of that. But in all seriousness, when you're leveraging the same network, and again, running a cybersecurity practice, I'm uber protective of my asset and my communications. I actually have a separate segment configured in my network for my business communications, and then I have I call it when we use air quotes, a public one for the rest of my environment and my friends that come over and want to connect. So essentially like a little guest network that just goes straight out to the internet. So yeah, that's probably a little bit of overkill for most folks, but certainly an option to do there as well. And most of the routers that are available today make that fairly straightforward for the most part. But if not, there's tons of how-to guides available on the internet to help with that as well.
Awesome, thanks, Luke. All great questions, all great answers. Thank you to our panelists. That does wrap up the Q&A portion of this presentation. Corey, back over to you.
Right. Thank you, Nikita. And thank you all to our panelists and participants for joining us today. We hope that you were able to gain some perspectives on the world of cybersecurity. Big thank you to our panelists for presenting and sharing their amazing careers with us and their experiences. Before we let you all go, I'd like to remind you that any alumni watching, our students are still in need of internships. We'll be sending out some additional information to everyone who participated today, along with a short survey. But if you can fill that out and get it back to us, please, that would be awesome. Please let us know how we did. With that said, thank you for tuning in and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.